People who divorced after only 1 year. What happened? He expected me to return to work almost immediately after a medically necessary reduction and put his grass craving over helping me with bills for a month so I could heal properly. He spent $650 in MJ that month instead of helping his wife. He complained as soon as I got home from the hospital about how he's not okay with having to take care of me. I was in the ER one day and they had to keep me overnight for observation after a lumbar puncture caused some complications. And he came to see me for not even 10 minutes. He left because the chair was uncomfortable and he wanted to go sleep in our cozy bed that I bought, just like I bought almost everything else to turn our apartment into a home. He also stopped going to therapy and returned to his video cravings while arguing. He would always trade one craving for another and drove under the influence. I was not okay with that. I'm much happier knowing I'll never have to deal with that kind of behavior again. I believe that most of it was due to him being blinded by his cravings, which he denied. You can't help someone who refuses to help themselves, and I gave way too many chances. I even became a licensed peer support specialist to try and help him. Instead, I used what I learned to build up myself and develop the confidence to leave. Sounds like he needed a good dose of his own medicine. Story 2. I had almost canceled the wedding but convinced myself I was just getting cold feet. He was angry and judgmental all the time. He moved us into his mom's house until he found work. I was still studying at the time. Nothing was good enough for him. Everybody was too stupid. Every job was beneath him. His mom found him a job through a friend of hers. He went 2 days, then announced that if he was made to go back, he would crash the car into a tree. He said that he'd rather be homeless than do a job he didn't want. His brother asked, "What about your wife? You're married now." He said, "Oh, she'll follow." I made him go to therapy and move back to a bigger city where I could find work. He decided he wanted to go to work in Canada. That's when I knew I did not want to follow and be alone with him in a country where I knew nobody. I asked for a break to figure things out. He said, "You either leave me or we stay together." I didn't agree with breaks. I left. It was 9 months after the wedding. He wasn't supportive of anything I did. I was writing the first draft of my book at the time. I couldn't even get the genre right when people asked about it. I read a couple chapters and said, "None of the characters are like me." He caused conflict with his family and mine. I understand now that he was extremely depressed but refused to go back to therapy after the first couple sessions. Blamed it on me. Made my life miserable and I accepted it because I have my own trauma not figured out. Ran straight into another terrible relationship with another angry man after that and lost another 9 years. I have now removed angry people from my life altogether. Story 3. Not me, but my best friend. They're both chefs who met in culinary school, dated a few years and got married. My wife and I liked her a lot and we always did couple stuff together. Shortly after the wedding, he got a job in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and they moved. She was a baker, and the only place she could find to work was the Walmart bakery. Well, I hadn't talked to him in about a month, and my wife and I were calling him to let him know we decided to let them be the godparents of her son. He picks up the phone, and we get to talking, and before I get a chance to ask about the godparents thing, he lays it on me. He told him she was leaving him. He begged her to stay and told her they'd do counseling, move back home, or whatever she wanted to make it work. She declined and revealed she'd been cheating on him with a stock boy at Walmart while he's been working late nights, and she's going to get with him instead. That was weird, too, because she was a very good-looking girl and she was cheating on him with a dude whose teeth were rotting out. And I'm sorry, but was in his late 20s stocking shelves. As reported by his mom, we saw them out together when she came to town to move him home. I feel like if you're going to cheat, at least step up a bit, not down. They heard a couple years later that she got knocked up by him and they couldn't afford it and had to move into her mom's 2-bedroom apartment in the hood. He, on the other hand, met and married a great girl a few years after that. They've been married for nearly a decade now and are very happy together. Story 4. Dated the same guy for years. Got engaged, got married. Then the 2008 crash happened the same year they got married and he lost his job as a mortgage broker. She still had hers as a teacher. He became absolutely convinced that she was cheating. "If school ends at 2:35, why aren't you home until 3:30? It's only 10 minutes away." She explained she had other things to do after class, like grade papers, prepare tomorrow's lesson plan, make copies, whatever. He wasn't hearing it. The straw that broke the camel's back is when he got caught by school security in the school grounds with field glasses looking into her classroom as school let out. I guess he didn't expect me to catch her banging somebody in the classroom and didn't think, wow, maybe a single guy with binoculars hiding in the woods and spying in a middle school class isn't a good look. They got separated and divorced within a year. Story 5. I call it my starter marriage. He grossly misinterpreted who he was. He was willing to move mountains for us until we were us. Then he turned controlling, to the point where he changed the ways my keys were on my keychain. This was back when all cars and homes had keys. He refused to mow the lawn and would fight the tickets he got for it. By arguing that the base allowed 12 inches and it was only 11.5 inches, he would eat everything in the house, leave me no food, and then complain that he couldn't lose weight. His gift giving went from diamond earrings before marriage to a muffler in the box after marriage. The muffler is part of car maintenance. It's not a birthday gift. The final straw for me was when he got mad at our kin for being kin. If he does that to an animal, what will he do to a tiny human? I left at 7 months. I didn't even make it a year. At least the kin escaped his wrath. She dodged that one right there. Story 6. We lasted a little over a year. The first sign happened on our first night home from the honeymoon. He said he was going to sleep on the couch because he'd be more comfortable there, and that's where he slept nearly every night. He all but ignored me unless he had a work function for me to attend. Half an hour after I got home from having abdominal surgery, he asked what I was going to make for dinner. The final straw was when he yelled at me for spending $8. Yes, 8. On a pair of shoes for my grandfather's funeral. Then he spent $800 on a single golf club the next day. Lots of little things on a daily basis that let me know that he was perfectly happy with me being miserable. I grew my first hints of self-respect during that year and decided I was worth more. Story 7. We dated for 3 years before getting married. After getting married, everything changed and became more real. We were both 20 years old and very naive about our future and didn't really think about it. It was gradual in our marriage, but at some point, I realized that we wanted very different things in life. Although we were compatible, we would hold each other back for future plans. It's been 30 plus years. I talk to him as well as much you do on social media. I would never be able to live the life he leads now and be happy. He would never be able to live my life the way I live it now and be happy. It was inevitable that we would divorce. I've never held on to any resentment towards him. Just the sober awareness that we didn't think things out in a realistic way, so I took the blame. Married the right person the second time around, and I married the right person the second time around. Story 8. Not me, but my husband's first marriage. To be fair, they got married after only knowing each other for 6 months, which isn't nearly enough time to get to know someone before marrying them. They were young, about 22 years old and impulsive. Luckily, no children came from that situation. Within 6 months of marriage, she quit her job without discussing it first with her husband. She spent the last of her savings on a full arm tattoo, also without discussing with her husband first. Not that she needs permission, but if she wanted to spend the last of her savings on something dumb, there should be a discussion. Then she managed to drain their joint savings account, like $3,000 while he was away at a training school. That was the last straw. Story 9. Not me, but a friend. She was a purity ring girl of 20 the first time she got married. She waited until marriage and her husband was in his early 40s. He wanted a true submissive because he was a one true way man. He started her off with what we now call consensual non-consent, and it just got more shocking. He had a breakdown a few months into the marriage. It turned out that he had a cruel past, but it was pre-internet and it wasn't easy to find things out. She said that he did feel bad for what he did and went to therapy with her and had to learn that women were people too. She said he was making progress, but she realized that she needed space to evolve on her own, away from him, her church, her parents, etc. I met her when she was in her 40s, where we worked at a teen shelter and she was a counselor. Remarried. Very anti-religion. Story 10. We were working opposite shifts part of the time, and so when I was working and she was off, she would eat with her parents. Her mother was a total head case who never liked me and never believed anybody was good enough for either of her kids, so she was constantly in her ear about how she should have never married me. I tried to be respectful for the first 9 months and hoped she would decide her daughter's happiness was more important than her being in charge of everything, but that didn't happen. Wife was too weak to be her own person. For the last 3 to 5 months, I'd put up with all I was going to put up with and started telling her mother the harsh truth and being less willing to compromise around her demands and poisoning of the marriage. Wife went with her parents for a long weekend at the beach to think about everything. I knew she would come home and say she couldn't do it anymore and wanted a divorce, because I knew her mom would be in her ear all weekend. I was right. Funny thing now is when I read her face as she walked in when she got home, I told her I would listen to anything she had to say and we could talk as long as she wanted, but I warned her if she asked for a divorce, it would be over forever and nothing would ever undo it, so consider her words carefully. Sure enough, she said she wanted a divorce, so I said okay. We talked for about an hour and she left to go to her parents. 3 days later, she came back, tried as hard as she could to initiate intimacy. I had never seen her try so hard. I rejected her and reminded her what I had told her. She cried and said, could I please let her take it back and go low contact with her mom? I told her no and she needed to leave. She sat in her car for an hour crying, but eventually left. Never saw her one-on-one again. She's remarried with 3 kids in another state. I'm married with 2. The intimacy attempt was probably her mom's last-ditch effort to save the marriage. Story 11. My ex got diagnosed with a chronic illness 2 months after we got married. The short story is that he lost his mind and pushed everyone out, including me, after 4 months of marriage. He, out of left field, kicked me out of the house after 4 months of marriage. We tried to make it work for a couple of years with couples therapy while we were separated, but it didn't work. The longer story is that he lied pretty much through our whole relationship, 5+ years. He was able to mask up until he was diagnosed and then couldn't maintain the facade in his illness at the same time. To most people, including me and his family at first, it looked like he had a complete personality change. He went from loving, optimistic, and charismatic to rude, narcissistic, and aggressive. At one point, I had to call the police on him because he had shoved me during an argument. I'll never know why he really wanted to get married, as he was apparently having doubts when he proposed. I still will never know why he hung on for as long as he did, because he was telling his best friend, now ex-best friend, at the time that he wasn't interested in the marriage after we separated, and were still going to couples therapy. His behavior was just bizarre. And I was so upset over everything. I was just walking in a brain fog, not understanding what was happening. The only thing me and his ex-best friend can think of, I fit into his idea of a perfect life. His ex-best friend pointed out that our house was decorated the way he wanted it. He also got super jealous when I got a new job, making a lot more than him. I was a total dummy until it was too late. When he realized that divorce meant that he'd be off my health insurance, I think that's why he tried to hang on. I had a life-changing moment when I was at an art market that had a tarot reader. The reader happened to be someone with a chronic illness, and after I explained my situation to them, they told me, someone can be a schmuck and still have a chronic illness. Their illness is not their fault, but it is their responsibility. It completely blew my mind because I kept explaining away my ex's behavior as, well, he's sick. That's why he's acting that way. I was blaming a lot of myself for how and why everything went down. That reader was also incredibly blunt with me, which is what I needed at the time. I needed to get my act together, and I needed someone to tell me that very clearly and very seriously. That 1-hour reading was better than the years of therapy I'd had to deal with this situation. It's been over 7 years since I got booted from what I thought was going to be my forever home with my forever person. Last I've heard, my ex has no friends and is making no attempt at reaching back out to the ones he let go. His parents are rich, so he's probably going to continue living in our old house, not learning any lessons about life. I am doing better. I have my own house and I'm finally in a healthy relationship, but I have some heavy fears from that whole experience. Story 12. I was 19 and she was 18. She became pregnant and her family was very conservative. It was basically a quick wedding. Neither of us had much in the way of life skills. We barely knew each other. I also had some undiagnosed mental, neurological, and physical problems. Long story short, I could never hold a job and she wanted to stay home with a baby. We were living below poverty and was too proud to ask for handouts. While I was never cruel, I was definitely negligent of her emotions and needs. I was too in my own head trying to figure out what was wrong with me. One day I came home. A lot of stuff was gone and there were divorce papers on the coffee table. It took a long time, but I've been able to make my apologies to her and we're not what I would call amazing friends, but we get along. Well, I was dealing with a lot of crap and eventually went on disability. I don't consider it an excuse, though. I was a schmuck. Story 13. It was always an emotionally draining and cruel relationship that got worse with time. I thought I was cheating on him. He refused to get a job because it's your turn to take care of me. We had lived in his mom's house prior where she took care of him. Not him for me, by the way. And believed that everyone and everything was against him because he was a superior being that intimidated other people. Ugh. Well, he never laid hands on me. And with my absolutely loving upbringing, sarcasm, I assumed the relationship was not that bad because he wasn't physically cruel to me. Until we had another stupid argument and I went to bed early. I came back from storming around the neighborhood for the last 4 hours, no doubt hoping I was going to call him and apologize and panic that he hasn't returned for dinner. Anyway, he got himself ready for bed and I could hear that he was still angry with his huffing and kicking his shoes off, etc. He eventually got to bed and laid down, sat up, lay down, rolled, what have you, to try to wake me up and coddle him, but I kept pretending to sleep. After a minute of this, he was lying still and I thought he had finally given up, but the second I thought I could just actually sleep, very hard, crushing pain flashed. I sat up immediately just as he quickly rolled over to face the opposite wall and act as though he was asleep. He elbowed me in the face. Who hits someone when they're asleep? I remember trying to cover it with makeup and match the other eye with eyeshadow so it looked like it was an intentional artistic thing. I don't think anyone was fooled. Months later, I somehow convinced him to move back to my country, where it was apparently my turn to take care of him and a bundle of other romantic notions and events took place. Like dressing up in his military uniform, never went on tour, He was on reserve. So basically a Boy Scout as far as I care. And walk around town waiting to be praised for his service and bum drinks at the pubs. I think it took another 6 months to build up the courage and build enough of a support system that I could leave him. Thankfully, he truly was a coward. Nothing else transpired. He ran out of his visiting visa without a job or another person to sponsor him through citizenship. So I went back to England and likely rewrote history to villainize me and my family, the people I'd made friends with there. But that was some of the cost of getting away. My dog and I had another wonderful 11 years together until she passed last October. Still painful, but I would do all of that again to have her from the start. The rest just makes for a good story, and my advice is to never settle or give the self-proclaimed gentleman or a nice guy a chance. He's likely an incel who hates everyone for his own failures. Truly good men don't spend a year pretending and trying to convince others they're good. Story 14. There were red flags prior, but I agreed to get married so I could get into his health insurance. I wanted to leave my toxic job. He quit his job within 2 weeks of marrying. He stayed unemployed for a couple of months and wrote fan fiction. He started amping up his paranoia about me cheating. He stopped letting me go with him to see our friends. One incident that sticks out is him yelling at me because I referred to him as Big Brother in a text to a friend. Another was him driving dangerously because he was upset that someone liked the new Star Wars movies. I tried talking to my mom and a few mutual friends about the cruelty, but they told me that I was overreacting. I told him that I wanted a divorce about 6 months in. I had no other place to go. He kept me from sleeping for 2 days until I relented. He threatened to ruin my life. At that point, a switch flipped. I decided that I could pretend to be happy for a few months while making an escape plan. I still lost a lot of friends over it all. The kicker is that my mom knew that my ex-husband was letting a friend try to talk to him into moving across the country with her and her boyfriend. It started around the time we got married. Mom didn't tell me. She, as a conservative Southern woman, also realized before he did that he was walking into a polyamorous sugar mama situation. Story 15. 4 months. It was the only time I ever cheated on someone, and I still regret it wholeheartedly. I could have just ended it, but I was so immature. I grew up uber religious, and my mom wouldn't let us just move in to try it out because then we'd be living in sin. So we got married. I moved across the country to live with him. He would work 10 to 12 hours a day, come home, watch Top Gear for 2 hours, and go straight to bed. Saturdays were spent with his friends. Sundays were spent with his family. I never had one-on-one time. Intimacy was spare and terrible. Left on my own for 5 days a week, essentially. I started playing League with friends from back home. Got introduced to one of their buddies, who would play and talk for hours and really hit it off. Husband found my chats one day while I slept. I didn't even deny it. Just bought a ticket to fly home. I ended up paying for the divorce, which is fair. Didn't share any assets, so I was able to write my own divorce decree in a couple hours. My mom was going on a cruise to Alaska with her bestie, so I flew with him because the poor was in WA and so was my then husband. Met him to get his signature in front of a notary. Sent it to the court from there. He and I went to get lunch together after that. Admitted we both weren't ready and were glad to end on amicable terms. Now I'm with the love of my life. And he went on to have a more open dating life. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 16. Not me, but my friend married a guy and the marriage lasted 8 months. Her parents didn't like the guy and he and my friend were really young. I'd say both early 20s, but she swore she was so in love with him that he had to marry him so they could build a life together. So they had this big, lavish wedding, expensive honeymoon, and her parents rent them a pricey apartment to live in after the wedding. Well, within 2 months, she caught him cheating on her because he was bored and realized he couldn't be with just one woman. Oh, and there were substances. Lots and lots and lots of substance, which I think she knew all along but chose to ignore. So divorce it was, finalized in 8 months. I'd like to say there was a happy ending for her, but not so much. About 3 years later, she met another guy. Pretty much the polar opposite of her first husband, and married him about a year later. Honestly, the guy is a schmuck. He's hardworking and owns a very successful and lucrative business, but he's just a schmuck and treats my friend poorly and with a little respect. We moved cross-country about 2 years ago, and we don't talk much now, but I think the friendship would have fizzled anyway because I really, really, really dislike her husband and how he treats her, and she won't do anything about it. They've been together for about 10 years now, so I think this is just how it's going to be. Story 17. My ex-wife's son, who I even consider my son, told us that his biological father was mistreating him. The way he told us is that he acted out what he did. Sent my ex-wife into a depression and started drinking heavily. She started being harsh, verbally and physically cruel to me. I worked 50-plus hours, paid all the bills, and was taking care of her and her son and was only getting about 12 hours of sleep a week. We were living, I would say, more middle class to meet our standards as well. This happened right after we got married. I helped her pay for the court costs, her lawyers, going to the 3 therapy sessions a week, couples, psychologist, and child therapy. I eventually broke up after 8 months when I found her talking to other men, and her reasoning was because I wasn't emotionally there for her. After a year, I met someone else when I was still in the marriage. I didn't know how to escape, and I just couldn't think straight. I've never been in that condition in my life, and someone was there for me. Fast forward to today, I'm diagnosed with mild depression and severe anxiety. Her son still sees his biological father, and my ex-wife doesn't recognize any of this happened. And I'm the reason our marriage failed because of me leaving her for another person. I divorced her after a year and a half. If I could go back and do this again, I would have just left, but instead I had my mind on loving her and thought we could have gone through all of this until I eventually broke. Story 18. Bit of a rambling reply. Married early summer 2012. I was working 16 to 18 hours a day, sometimes more. 6 to 7 days a week as the place I worked was pretty short-staffed, and I picked up shifts whenever I could to save money as I had surgery coming up a few months later. I paid for him to go back to finish his bachelor's degree as his parents said he needed to get A's his first quarter. Then they would pay back to pay for classes the next quarter. But I'd still be out the money until he graduated and could help bring in money himself. I had my surgery 3 to 4 months after the wedding, and I was out of work for 3 weeks to recover. Went right back as soon as possible to pay bills, especially as I hadn't gotten any money from labor and industries from the surgery and I didn't want to screw over a roommate. He apparently met someone in one of his classes. So while I'm working and got a second job closer to home, he's screwing around on me. Even talked with his dad and friends about meeting her. I was so exhausted and stressed out, and I felt he had been pulling away from me. I didn't know what was going on, but I lost about 20 to 30 pounds in a month due to the stress, and I wasn't sleeping more than 2 to 4 hours a night for maybe 2 months. Doesn't help, he always said he couldn't be with someone where their stomach was bigger than their chest. So I thought that losing the weight would help make him more attracted to me. I quit the first job for the job closer to home in December of 2012, and so we could focus on our marriage. End of January 2013, I finally confronted him and asked what was going on. He tells me he wants a divorce. Argument ensues where I ask the standard, what did I do? Is there someone else? Etc. He just tells me he isn't in love with me anymore and that he doesn't know why we got married. I told him from the beginning that I would not get married unless he was serious and saw life with me. I did not want to get married and then get divorced. He was the one who proposed to me, convinced me multiple times when I got cold feet. The same day he told me he wanted to divorce, he told me he was dumb and wanted me back and we could go to therapy and everything. He left for school that week. Even though my mental health was shaky, I went on his computer as my laptop wasn't working. I found all the messages from her, the ones he talked to his friend about, how he wasn't working out, everything. I saw red. 100 screenshots later sent him my email for proof. I got home and I told him he needed to leave. He lied and betrayed our vows, and he's right. We shouldn't have gotten married. He laughed, I called my parents, and a plan was made. I ended up leaving the place and stayed with my best friend and her family. The Lils didn't know what was going on, but My Neighbor Totoro is now my favorite movie because of those two who helped heal my heart. The divorce was not easy, as he didn't pay for a thing and kept trying to push it off, and I wanted to be done with him entirely. August of 2013, finally got a divorce. Funny story, my ex-husband tried reaching out to me and found out he's now my ex-wife. So more power to them, but I wish that they leave me alone and don't try to get a hold of me. I'm happier and healthier. A new state, a new job, with a great relationship. Story 19. Married for 6 months. I married the wrong person. I knew it during the engagement, but I felt like I was in so deep with all of the wedding arrangements that it was too late. I struggled with self-esteem for most of my life, and I felt that I needed to settle just because he wasn't a total schmuck like the exes I'd had in the past. He was a nice enough guy. I'd been friends since high school. We were together romantically for 4 years and had been together since I was 22. I felt at the time that getting married was what I was supposed to do at that point. Live and learn. I have no feelings about it or about him. It was essentially like having a glorified roommate. No passion, no spark at all at any point, really. The way I see it is half of my peers I'm watching get married will be divorcing in their 40s, and I just beat them to the punch, giving myself a better shot at long-term happiness than they've got. I'm glad I divorced after 6 months rather than forcing it for 20 years. To be honest, I suspect he felt the same, considering his only fight against the idea was please don't, in one couple's therapy appointment. I guess I wasn't moving it along fast enough because, although I requested the divorce, I ended up filing the paperwork. Story 20. I really suspect he only married me to go to the honeymoon. Shortly after we got married, he developed an allergy. To what? I don't know, but I know it was real. He was unable to work due to his allergy. He had to take medicine. Then he was diagnosed with COPD. He started taking medicine for that and was feeling better. Started talking about him going back to work, and suddenly he was sick again. He confessed right before Christmas that he had stopped taking the medicine due to finances. His mother was a huge issue in our relationship. Prior to marriage, I thought we were on the same page. Whenever his mom treated me badly, he would acknowledge that her behavior was wrong. After we were married, right around Christmas time, he actually said to me, "We're married now. There's nothing you can do about it. You just get used to it and deal with it." He was lazy. I would work all day, come home, and no household chores would be done. He would leave as soon as I got home to go to the store to get food for dinner. The final straw was one night I got up to use the bathroom, and when I came back to bed, I saw his phone was lit up. Thinking someone was trying to call him, I looked at his phone. I found out he had been texting and messaging other women. I confronted him about it, and he said they were his online friends for some of the games he played on his phone. I told him if he can't talk to his friends in front of me, something is wrong. I told him I wanted to go to marriage counseling in November of that year. I brought it up again in December, and he said he wasn't going and he wasn't doing anything wrong. I looked at his phone, and he was talking bad about me to his female friends that he was texting. I waited until after Christmas to tell him I wanted a divorce. His parents and brother came over to our place for Christmas and would only speak to me if I spoke to them. We were divorced almost a year to the day we were married. He moved back in with his parents. One of his friends moved into their house to be with him, and I met a great guy after my divorce was finalized. I don't have any contact with my ex-husband, and I'm not sorry. Story 21. About 30 seconds after we left the church, he became insanely jealous, to the point that he demanded that I quit attending university, that I could only wear the clothes he chose for me, because my torn-up jeans and oversized hoodies were apparently way too sexy, and that if he couldn't chaperone me when I set foot outside the house, his mother had to do so in his stead. I was completely convinced that I was actively cheating with everyone, from the mailman to every single professor, associate, postdoc, dean, etc. at the university. How on earth I would accomplish that just from a logistical POW? I have no idea, since that's well over 3,000 people total. He started screaming that I was a gold digger, didn't have a dime to his name, that I did nothing but sit on my back all day, which is pretty difficult if you have intimacy with 3,000 plus people on a regular basis, just saying. And at the 1-month mark, he smacked me in the face full force with his wallet of all things. He went all Pikachu face when he received the divorce papers. Story 22. One of my best friends married a dude that treated her great for years. She was from an extremely wealthy family and he grew up poor. The second they were official, he flipped the switch and was a total nightmare. Their whole relationship was an act for him to get her money. The final straw was when he hit her. She left their home, and when she went back, he had taken everything. Her family filed the papers and hired a shark to protect her, but she didn't have it in her to fight him and just gave him what he wanted to go away. The story has a tragic ending. She could never get over what he did and just drank every day. She passed away of multi-system failure from drinking not long after. Another one was my wife's friend. They were a military husband and lawyer wife, together for over 10 years before they got married just after she took the bar exam. After that, she got a great job and the power dynamics shifted. She was the breadwinner and he didn't like not having a housewife. His family also got in his ear about her sleeping with a boss when she left town for trials. I think there were also some other issues. Not long after the divorce, she quietly married a partner at the firm and had some kids. Story 23. We were living in a suite in his parents' basement, a state over from where my family lives, about an hour apart. My parents were going away for a week, and for a few of those days, my husband was going to a training session for his new job. I didn't want to be by myself with my in-laws, so I decided to stay at my parents' house and catch up with my friends. The first night, I invited my friend and her brother over. He arrived first. She got off work at 11, and we sat on the couch watching a show about dinosaurs. After about 45 minutes, I heard the garage door open. It was my husband, livid. He was all, "Aha, I knew my dad was right and you were a cheating floozy." He left, did some donuts in the front lawn, then called the police and said I was trying to end it all. So a whole squad of cops showed up and wouldn't believe me that I wasn't trying to end it all. Although by this time I wasn't too far off. Over the next few months, he cooled down and told me to get an apartment and a dog, and he joined me soon. I got the apartment and we went to weekly therapy sessions, after which we'd go on dates, parting tearfully with plenty of making out. I could barely wait for him to join me in our new home. But then the last weekend of October is the social event of the season, the Halloween loop. I went with a different friend, her fiancé, and his brother, who I'd never met and didn't know was coming. We ran into my husband and his friends. They were not unfriendly to me, but it was a little awkward. On Halloween night, my husband said he's made his decision and to meet him outside his work. Packed a bag, optimistic that I was going home. But he, a human ice cube, said we were getting divorced and never speaking again. I was so confused. What about the dates? The apartment? He said that was before he caught me on a date in the Halloween loop. So that was the end of that. Until 5 years later when he suggested we get back together and I laughed at him. Story 24. I was married at 20. We had been together since we were 13 and friends since 6, more than just high school sweethearts. 5 months after being married, I got pregnant and he wanted me to get a termination. I refused to do so, and he didn't like that. So he started causing an argument every day. I'd get home from work and it would be an argument about how my shoelace was tied the wrong way. I got sick of this after 3 months and left to spend a few days with my sister. A few days turned into a few weeks, and a few weeks turned into 2 months before he finally reached out to me and asked to get together to talk. We did. He apologized and said that he had started therapy and that he wants to start over with me again and welcome our baby into a loving home. I took the chance. 1 month later, 6 months pregnant, he got home late from hanging out with a friend. I was laying in bed but was on his side as mine was feeling uncomfortable, and he got mad. So mad that he punched not only me but my stomach. Luckily, my sister is an emergency contact, so I was able to quickly dial her without him knowing, and she heard him yelling at me. Very harsh words, and came racing over. It was hell to get me out, but we did. Went to the ER and all was fine, thankfully. 8 years later and have a beautiful, almost 80-year-old boy. I haven't talked to him since court. My mom gave him the divorce papers. We went into court to deal with parent stuff, and ever since then, he's been missing in action. My boy doesn't, and most likely will never know who his true father is, and though he was horrible to me, it breaks my heart for my boy. I'm thankful I ended up finding my husband now, and he's the best dad to bro that I could have ever asked for. Moral of the story, never think you know someone. Story 25. My parents did that. My mom wanted to break up with my father because he was a huge man-child, but she got pregnant with me, and my grandma told her it's either a wedding, a termination, or she's getting disowned. She didn't want to be a single parent with no support system, so she chose the marriage. They got married when my mom was 5 months pregnant, and she moved in with my father in a small town 200 kilometers away from the city she lived in before. She hated every minute of it. My father and the in-laws were all completely useless and annoying, so when I was 3 months old, my mom took the train with me to the other side of the country to stay with her parents, but they convinced her to go back and try again. This repeated a few times, but in the end, my mom had enough, and they got divorced before the first anniversary. Story 26. My friend's brother's first marriage was just over a year, and one day his wife said, "I just don't feel like being married." To the shock of both sides of the family, she just up and left. No other man, no change of life, just walked out of the marriage like the concept bored her. Her parents profusely apologized and were furious. "Never raised our daughter to be like this. Have no idea what got into her." Literally had no allies on her side on either side, and she just ignored any attempt to talk to her about it. She didn't even have any specific complaints. Just a huge case of, broke his heart. I mean, freaking shattered him. Not just her leaving, but how blaze she was about it, like he had just been a toy that she got tired of. This brought in many trust issues, and he didn't even try to date again until a decade later. Eventually, he remarried. Found a good wife, now has 2 kids, and seems pretty happy. Doesn't speak about his first marriage at all. Story 27. We married just after I graduated college and got a good job. He had 1 semester of college left before graduating. He quit halfway through that semester and neglected to tell me for 2 months. He left every morning like he was going to class, but actually went to his mom's house to play video games with his brother all day. I was working 2 jobs to support us until he got a degree and a good job. He didn't tell me he had quit until I asked what his grades were looking like and if he wanted to help studying for finals. After he confessed, I gave him the option of either going back to school, getting a full-time job, or going back to live with mommy. He didn't think he could handle a full-time job and didn't want to go back to school, so we parted ways. We were together for like 9 months. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.